Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the TF Podcast, where we discuss technology and finance. I'm Jonathan G. Blanco. Please make sure that you are subscribed to our channels across social as well on the podcast and YouTube. My guest today is Taban Cosmos. He is the co-founder and CTO of Guide, and I'd love if you could welcome him to the show. Taban, please introduce yourself.
Hey, thank you, Jonathan. So I am definitely the CTO and co-founder of Guide, and Guide is basically a bite-sized content app designed for distant learners and also professionals that are looking to sharpen their skills on demand.
Cool. Well, Taban, I'd love to kind of get a little bit into your background. I talked about you on a recent podcast when I was talking about superpowers and so forth, and your story is is an inspirational one, I think, and I love that you have been able to come out of a interesting situation, to say the least, and become a talented software engineer. So I'd love if you could kind of give us a little bit about your background, and I'm feeling that's going to lead the conversation.
Yeah. So I've been in the States now for about 11 years, moving from a refugee camp in Kenya. That is northeastern part of Kenya. It had the largest refugee settlement in the world at that time. I think right now the number has been decreasing due to government requiring people to shut the camps down. But long story short, we moved to Kenya when I was about 6 or 7 years old at that time. My parents had to flee war-torn South Sudan due to civil war. And so the journey definitely is an interesting one, having to go from one country to another to seek for a better life. And definitely my parents have had this concept where they could find somewhere where their kids will have better education and stay in a peaceful state or a peaceful space where they can enjoy life.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you spent 13 years in a refugee camp, and you're a software engineer. How did that happen? Were you able to learn software engineering at the refugee camp, or was that all that you learned once you came here?
Actually, I learned all of this when I came here. I remember the first time I got introduced to computers was actually not computers, but typewriters. There were typewriters at a library that I was at, and they only had about 3 or 4 typewriters. I'm talking about 2006, right? The world already had computers and everything and smartphones. We had typewriters. So I started playing with typewriters, this mechanical thing, and I liked it. Then I wanted something a little bit better. Like I knew I could actually take those typewriters, um, apart and put it back together, but you're not allowed that in the library. Um, Fast forward when I knew that I was gonna come to the United States, I already heard of Bill Gates. I've already heard of like this big software, guys. But I also got my first hand on a computer, a Windows XP or Windows 98. That's when I was like, wow, this thing is fantastic, right? But my background as a kid was always figuring things out and just wanting to build something out of nothing, or just playing with circuit boards, and electronics and all this kind of stuff. Like it's fun, right? Um, so by the time I already started to play with the computers at the library, I found myself really interested in how things were working on the computer. I was doing CMD, command, dir, and all this kind of stuff. It was amazing. The time I moved here is when I thought, okay, since I like logical things or just fixing things in general, I might as well just study computer science. And I was living not so far away from Microsoft at that time too. So I found myself gradually studying computer science and doing as many projects as I can. And that's and then I went to study computer science at both Bellevue College, went to City University, and then went to Central Washington University, where I studied more computer science and software engineering.
Nice, nice. And so, when you think about your journey and where you've come from and, how you've been able to, essentially drive yourself to learn software engineering and so forth, I know you're doing a lot of things right now where you're working with, folks in Africa, for example, and helping them with learning how to code and learning how to program, as well as, software engineering, and having them do work. I'd love if you could touch a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think uh, being in the States, I've seen how privileged I am in many ways. And I've also seen how there's so many opportunities that I can tap in. Because I have the drive with the opportunity in place, I'm able to find what I can do with my life. But when I look back, putting myself in that same shoes, I would have not seen this. I would have not seen or assumed or even thought that I would be where I am today if I was still there, right? And my goal is that in many ways, for kids living in underprivileged places in Africa, they definitely would need something that can turn it into you see, knowledge-based education that can help them sort of like take, get away out of the poverty that they're in. And I don't think any government anytime soon in Africa or in some part of Africa is going to realize that Africa needs to move into a knowledge-based, what do you call, continent, and that one hasn't been happening for so long. So my goal really is to start slowly, and if I can train 10, 20 software developers in Africa in the next 5 years or 10 years, those people will be people that will create the next, what do you call, software platforms that would help, run their villages or run their cities or their towns. And that is sort of like my goal. Like I want to have like that tech culture effect that can eventually spread, like a virus, but in a good way.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you said something I thought was really interesting about, Africa becoming like a knowledge based place and so forth, or focusing on that. And, what are the things that you think it takes for that to happen? I know there's a couple different companies that have built out engineering forces in Africa, like Andela and
Hmm.
some of these other places. Curious just what your thoughts are on over that. How is the level of software engineering talent that is in Africa and some of these places and so forth?
Yeah, I think companies like Andela, and there's another one that just came across. I don't remember what the name exactly is. They were able to, because here's the thing, about 80% of African population is they're all young people, right? They're all hungry, ready to just innovate. An example is Nigeria. Nigeria has about 200 million people. That means there's so many talents that definitely can be tapped, right? Um, Having that in place, I think these companies are doing so great that they're able to train these software engineers who have not gone through this regular, what do you call it, traditional education system of 4 years going to a university studying computer science. And they're able to pick it up pretty fast and be ready in less than 12 months to actually do the job. So I think that the potential is there. It's just that this, those companies have figured out that if we are able to provide this young minds the knowledge that they need, they will eventually become a global competitor in terms of skills and talents, right? They already paved a ground that yes, you can literally have African engineers that can work in really complex applications, and you can definitely invest in Africa in many ways through Andela or through things like we are doing right now. The first thing we're trying to do really is uh, find kids, like be able to find a couple like kiosks or schools and be able to like give them, because we already have the software, but we also want to provide them the computers and the internet that they need in order to be able to learn, because these kids will not, they don't have that and the parents can't afford it. So once we are able
Sure.
to create that, eventually those kids, when they grow up, they will definitely see themselves becoming somebody else. If they don't become like the software engineers they want, they could become the people that might run those, companies that are going to be created because they already have a fundamental understanding of how the world runs in terms of software, and entrepreneurship. And actually, we want to focus on entrepreneurship as well, because you can't have software without people who can actually take the product to the next level.
Yeah, sure. Sure. That makes sense. So, I want to move into kind of just emerging tech and payments and so forth. So, particularly like in Africa, I can't remember the name of the company, but there's that major payments company
M-Pesa.
that yeah, that they do a lot of things via phone, right? Because when Africa is considered a mobile first, continent essentially, right? Where there wasn't a ton of people that had computers, but most have, phones now. And so, not just in Africa, but just in general, like, what are your thoughts on opportunities when it comes to, these countries that don't have legacy infrastructure, and are able to, and from a computer science standpoint, and are able to just jump right into the new world and adapt to that. It seems like that can create some interesting opportunities to leapfrog other countries or other scenarios, based off of that. And I know in Africa, for instance, there's actually also a higher understanding of cryptocurrency and things like that. I'd love if you could touch on those elements.
Yeah, I would love to go and rant on that. There is definitely a high spike in terms of mobile usage in Africa. That has not only been recently, I think it has been since 2005. Um, in 2006, I've had my first phone already. I used it to transfer money from, by sending a text, or they call it SMS. I think it's short message something. So I would do that basically hash, pound sign, but we call it hash. You put a amount and then I think the number of the person that you want to send the money to, and boom, it goes there, right?
Oh, got it. Sending payments via SMS.
SMS. Yep,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
by having like different commands. Interesting. Yep.
exactly. Yeah, and it's probably like one of the most intuitive and most simplest way of using mobile payment. Like, period.
Hmm.
It can never get any simpler than that, right? You don't need to have a beautiful interface. You don't need to have anything else. You just need to have that screen that shows the numbers and your dial pad. That's it. And I think M-Pesa has done really great job. There's companies such as like Safaricom, MTN, all this stuff. Those are players that help with the what do you call, the adoption of sort of like many mobile payment system, or just technology in general. And you mentioned something about Africa just leapfrogging to the newest things, or the newest and the best, right? And to say that, I first of all I want to be able to say this. I think every continent or every country in this world today have found the strength, right? After, China already knew that they can be the tool manufacturers for the world, so that people can buy things from them, they can use it to build things, right? And the US, like, oh, we're gonna innovate, we're gonna do this so that people can use our innovation to better the world. So is Europe, so is other places. Now Africa needs to find its own sort of like spot in this global economy. And there's so many ways for Africa to do that. And I think the emerging technologies such as Bitcoin and just cryptocurrency in general, I think it would have a major impact in Africa in many ways, because the African currency, or not the African currency because it's nothing as the African currency, but the currencies that are in individual countries in Africa has been suffering political, what do you call, upheaval, or just
Yeah, just massive inflation as a result of just the way it's run.
Yep, exactly. And it's really affecting how businesses are being transacted. And having it now, the level of like you said, the level of cryptocurrency understanding in Africa has really skyrocketed. So many people understand how cryptocurrency work. There is an example of a company that is trying to do a financial inclusion. It's called, I think, Moja Loop, and it's based actually here in Bellevue, and it's been, I think, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They're creating a crypto-based payment system using the blockchain to facilitate payments and make it a lot easier for people in the third world to be able to carry transactions. And I think it's pretty amazing. I haven't really read much into it because I myself I have affinity for fintech, but I haven't really dove into it deeply because I need to
Sure.
get things done first. But Africa definitely can position itself to jump into the newest stuff. But I think it needs to first of all establish itself as a specific type of player in the industry. It can't just keep jumping from one technology to another without creating its own base, right?
Hmm.
So it needs to be able to, let's say, create infrastructure for internet access. It needs to be able to understand that in order to move forward, we need stability, right? Without stability in a country or in a continent that's huge, even the newest and the best technologies would not even grow as much as we would expect it. It would possibly, or it would probably grow in certain areas like Rwanda, which is doing a really great job by really educating its people to code, by educating its people to kind of like just understand the world around it and be able to build a powerhouse. A tiny landlocked country in Africa doing way better than most countries that we think today, and one of probably cleanest city in the world today.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
Hmm.
So, when we think about just payments overall and just overall adoption of call it mobile first tech, um, you know, how has that evolved in Africa, or just in your mind? Like, what can people in the United States, from a technology standpoint, learn from developing nations to how we in the U.S. or Europe are thinking about payments and cryptocurrency? Like, what are the things that we can learn from them and apply here?
I think that's a very good question. I have not been in Africa in a long time to even know.
Well,
Uh,
like for example, like what I think about is a lot in that mobile first mentality, right? And so, like, as much as people say like they cash needs to go away, like frankly, a lot of people still hold cash because they have to, because that's how they're getting paid. But I
mhm.
know in Africa, and in parts of Asia, it's like you're still primarily paid digitally. And so I wonder, is this coronavirus something that now everybody starts thinking more in this digital context, and they don't want it? Is that the driver, or is it just that, or does it even matter? Like, do we need to? I just love your kind of opinions on that.
Yeah, that's actually okay. I have never met any sort of like opinion on that, but I think definitely, let's just talk about the coronavirus pandemic. I think it has, in many ways, opened the eyes of most of the what do you call sovereign leaders in Africa in terms of how to think about their economies, right? And so, for them to be able to even improve the economy, they will have to start thinking, okay, now of course, inflation has affected how people, transact. And also money is just like, it's a commodity that is just like everywhere. Like now, I don't know if the government has to like print money all the time and get the money like, I don't know, exported or imported, whatever that is. But I think that in terms of payment, um, definitely there's some move that there's a company called, I think, Okera or something like that in Nigeria that has already, I think that's the right name. Uh, it has already positioned itself to be a leading payment platform, I think, in Nigeria. It's trying to take this, like, create this cashless society where people will not depend on their cash anymore, where you have to have just like electronics. And I think that the West, or mostly America and other places that are already digitally went further. I think the only thing that would have learned from how things are running in Africa is that the adoption for things is probably easy in Africa because there's like there's not so many regulations in place that will hinder any type of like technology advancement, right? Because there's
Hmm.
really no any other laws in place. And in terms of like privacy, I think this will probably be probably be the only time when Africa would be like, yeah, you know, we don't care about privacy, let's do whatever, right? And when the countries are becoming more advanced, that's when people will be like, oh, okay, now let's hold on. Now that we're at this stage in our lives, 20 years from now, you know, now we need to understand what does those technologies do? Do they affect us as citizens of the world? That our information is being used for certain things or all this kind of stuff. So that's when those concerns can come later. But at this point, I think adoption for anything is what other places in the world would definitely need to understand. Like cryptocurrency, for example, when it started, I think the adoption rate, you even know this very well, in the US has been really slow, right? Like our government do not understand like that this thing is a potential that they can monitor almost every type of like um, funds issuing and all this kind of stuff. Because right now, for example, with the stimulus package, where you have companies that are already worth billions or millions that are receiving millions of stimulus package, this money should have not really gone to those companies. They should have gone
Yeah.
to companies that were making less than a million a year that have probably like 50 employees, right?
Right.
And because we're not using cryptocurrency or any type of like digital currency that we can track who is actually being given or issued the money at this point that it's hard for us to like want to say, yeah, company A is given this money and they're not supposed to get this money, but also at the
Yeah.
same time we have created this like loose end where, you know, anything can happen because we want, um, you know, as a politician, I'm not talking about as myself, but as a politician, since I have a hand in specific companies, I want those companies to get this money because I know I'm going to get a share out of it. So the government really would be able to use something like this to improve its own funding-based society. I don't know if you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, no. So you actually made me think of an interesting question that I feel like you'll have a way to answer. And so, when we talk about digital currency and digital assets and blockchain, like there's good and bad. Blockchain obviously it still has a lot to prove out, and there's great potential there. But for the most part, it's still on its way for scale, right? And so one of the issues that have come up when people think about digital dollars, digital assets, or even a U.S. digital dollar is privacy and security and the traceability element, right? Because like if you are sending things via blockchain,
Mhm.
you could essentially measure everything and see. And so, I'd love to talk about that from a technical aspect, right? Because you touched on that a little bit when you're saying like, hey, like if there was some level of cryptocurrency, in these stimuluses, you'd be able to track it better. And like that might seem strange to someone that doesn't necessarily know how code works, right? Because they're like, well, what are you talking about? Like it's just, you send it and you see it, but it's more the auditability function of it, right? And
Yep.
like
Yep.
basically building commands, to understand so I'm not saying that you can't figure that out however it's done now. It's just a lot more laborsome and cumbersome, and that's why probably things get forgotten. So I'd love if you could kind of just talk about just you know from a code-based standpoint, when we think about digital currency or crypto, like why that's interesting from an auditability standpoint. And mind you, this might not be like the best solution when it comes to decentralization or to remaining anonymous or whatever, those kind of things. That there's other aspects of that, like one of the things that make Bitcoin really interesting, right, is that you can be in self-control. But in a non-Bitcoin context of just digital cash, we're still going to need digital cash. Let's talk
Mhm.
about the code reasons for that.
Yeah. In many ways, I think cash right now is already digitized because we use credit cards, right? Um, but also, I think that each what do you call note that is being released by the Federal Bureau, or is it like the Feds? It has a specific identification, right? And I don't want to like spend my time on this one note, but adding traceability in terms of like code, I think in many ways, it is basically trying to understand that each dollar that's being spent is actually being spent according to what it actually has been allocated for. So when we talk about when we talk about auditing, I think in many ways, many companies that are larger corporations would definitely want to understand that, okay, we have allocated X amount of money into this fund to be used for ABCD. And if any single dollar with this code has not been used for that and went into someone's pocket, then there is a fraud that has been, sort of like that have taken place in regards to where the fund's supposed to be. And the idea here is that it's actually easier to trace it, in a way that the computer or the code itself is created smart enough to just basically understand that, yes, there is X amount of number of currency with this type of code that has been allocated in this specific place. And if any of this code has missed, is being transferred into a different type of funds, then there's an issue. And it's easy to trace that, right? Because we know that it's immutable. Once you remove something from a place or allocate something from a location that it's not supposed to be, then you know that something suspicious has happened, as opposed to like using a database where you can just change numbers and the numbers will look still fine, but the money is not being used where it's supposed to be. Um, I don't know if that really answers the question. I don't want to get too deep into like the code part of it because
No,
I,
no, no, but that's what I want to. Let's get deep on that code part because I think just sure it might go over the head of some people, but when we think about that, that's really what we're talking about here. It's not like yes, you can send information, you can send things digitally today,
yeah,
but a lot of these things can be edited, changed. There's one ledger type of thing,
yeah,
and so. And don't get me wrong, there's definitely problems with this. There's definitely problems with tracing every transaction, tracing every dollar, and there's security and privacy concerns that I think are very, very valid, of course. But yeah, I think just for people to understand from a code standpoint, like that why the government or why someone might want that is super interesting, because like you're saying is that if you can trace where funds are going and how it's being spent, if you are in a government context, that makes a lot of sense, to make sure that things are getting distributed properly. Again, there's other issues there, right? Like if that gets abused, or if people are then prevented from spending their own digital currencies that they have, in the future or whatever, like those are other issues and other problems that obviously need to be solved. But
mhm,
yeah, just thinking from the code standpoint. So, if we're going to think about how cryptocurrency is used in a digital dollar context, or like China has their own cryptocurrency and they're thinking about blockchain, one of the interesting things about China, for example, is that they're tying currency to digital identity, digital currency to digital identity. And so, right, everything that you track or you spend or do is tracked, and it's, you know, it kind of also fits the narrative of how China's run, for that matter, right? A very much um, a visible state. And so, in the United States, where we pride ourselves on freedom and our liberties and so forth, while digital currency could be very interesting from a payment standpoint, there are going to be some concerns by people when it comes to them thinking about uh, all their payments being tracked or traced. And, maybe what these people aren't realizing also is that when they do spend on, um, MasterCard or Visa, it's still tracked or traced. It's just that it's not necessarily, it's in private hands, not in public hands. So, there's definitely things to think about when it comes to how we uh, consider digital currencies, at mass, but there's no doubt it's going to come and happen.
yeah. I mean, I like the point that you mentioned that still today we track things, right? That's absolutely correct. And the idea that people are, crying for their what do you call um, privacy, and that people are gonna like track them and those kind of stuff. We definitely understand that there's gonna be definitely that type of aspect in almost every new technology that's coming into play. And with that, even I think if if let's say if we are to use cryptocurrency to tie it to, like, let's say, credit score, right? I think it would probably play a better role as opposed to like having handful of companies like Equifax trying to like calculate, I don't know, somehow getting your information and using it to get you a credit score, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah, because there's so much human error capabilities, or there's like misperceptions as well, or,
Yep.
things like that. Like maybe you get a poor medical record, or
Hmm.
you don't pay for something on your medical record or sorry, on your medical bill.
Hmm.
And then that affects your score. Yeah.
and and also to even add on top of that, thank you for making me think right now. I think so. Going into the idea of like the Equifax and credit score and those kind of stuff, I know that there are people that have paid off sort of like their loans and all this kind of stuff, but still sometimes it does not reflect onto their credit score after probably like a couple months. Let's say you paid everything today. Um, if I was using digital currency and somehow the audits for my payment should happen instantaneously, like I should have my score go to 900 right away as soon as as soon as I took care of my what do you call my payments, right?
Yeah.
And in many ways, if somebody is sent to a collection, right? Um, Sometimes the collections do not report back that this thing has been paid off. It takes them probably like a week or two in order to get that thing handed over.
Yeah.
So the latency between all the services is definitely affecting how fast we could have like got information into place and be able to like say that yes, this indeed did happen and that it was secure and all this kind of stuff. And so you don't have anyone fraudulently trying to even take money from you while it is not even some of like the like payments that you have to pay, right?
Totally. Yeah, like we all talk about digital currency, and like I had someone send me, cash, or send me money via an ACH, and it's been pending, for more days than it probably should. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like that wouldn't happen, right, in a crypto or digital context, because it's just mapped, to that ledger immediately, essentially. Well, I should say, sure, it takes time to confirm the transaction,
Yeah,
but like, yes, I'm getting my money digitally. Yes, the bank is kind of staking or holding the funds and like letting me have some access to it, but I want all access to it because I need all access to it. But these are why, digital currency or sending payments via, in a crypto context is so appealing, because of the fact
yeah.
that it's essentially instant cash.
Oh, absolutely. No, yeah, definitely, definitely, yeah. And I think yeah, I want to say this. Heads of states in Africa would definitely not want a system like that as of now. But I think that private companies are the only companies that will definitely bring those technologies in Africa in general, due to the fact that like most of these head states are definitely corrupted. Like
Sure.
every money that has been given by the World Bank for them to develop roads, hospitals, schools, and stuff like that, those those money, I would say 80% of it does not even go to the project that's supposed to be.
Sure. Yeah. Well,
And oh, go ahead.
no, no, you go. Sorry.
Yeah, and companies or institutions like World Bank would definitely benefit from cryptocurrency in itself, right? They will be able to. So here's the thing: if no one is holding these countries or these heads of states accountable for their frauds, then somebody has to, right? Because the citizens themselves can't do that because it is an what do you call it? It's a dictator sort of like type of government where
Yeah.
people don't cannot voice their concerns. And so in many ways, then the World Bank will be able to decide, look, we give you about $5 billion or $10 billion in order to fix ABCD. And based on our record, you have only spent 2 billion on that. Where is the rest of the X amount that was supposed to be used, right? So
Totally. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, a lot of people think it, from the government down, but right, when nations are borrowing from each other or from the World Bank, yeah, and what a lot of people don't realize when it comes to these countries that are run by dictators, authoritarian rule, is that uh, they benefit from hyperinflation, right? Like
absolutely.
it's to their benefit to degrade their own currency, because it keeps their people oppressed. And it's a hard thing for people in the West to kind of grasp, like, why would you do that? It's like, oh, because it makes it easier. It's a form of control, right?
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
Taban, this has been a great conversation. I'd love to leave you with the floor and ask you a question. Ask you to ask a question. So what is a question that you want to ask everybody and have them think about as they go about their day?
That's a good one. My question for you is, it's gonna be a general one. A general question. What do you expect to see change in the next 6 months as the coronavirus is either coming to an end or is here to stay for
All
some time?
right. Yeah. All right. What do you expect to change? I like that. Great, man. Well, hey, thanks for being on the show. What are some good ways that people can stay in touch with you?
Yeah, people can follow me on LinkedIn at Cosmos or Taban Cosmos. Follow me on there. Probably that's like the only place you can follow me professionally. But if you want to also follow me on my IG, you can follow me Cosmos Taban, and on my Facebook would be Taban Cosmos. But I would prefer my LinkedIn because that's where I am. I spend most of my time responding to professional emails and people that want to collaborate. I am a collaborator, so if you want to collaborate and have some things you want to share with me, I'm definitely available there.
Excellent. Excellent. Everybody, thank you for listening to another episode of the TEF podcast. Please make sure that you are subscribed wherever you're listening to this. Follow us on YouTube, and you can follow me at JG Product on Twitter and at TF Blockchain on Twitter as well. Thanks so much. Please rate and review. If you like this podcast, fill up those stars. It goes a long way, and would really appreciate if you could share our podcast with your friends and colleagues. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.